Good morning. Good to be together today. Revolutionary Kingdom Declarations. Have you done the math? We are 2/3 through the class.
It's not working out.
It's not working out. I don't know what our problem is. What could be our problem? It could be the teacher is not a good budget of time guy. So here's the thing. I can rush through in the next 3 weeks, and actually I'm going to miss the following week, and somebody else can just finish it up for me. Or we can put this class on pause for the summer and resume in the fall. That is kind of what we're thinking about right now. Now, you may have a specific opinion about that because I get it. You didn't sign up for a 6-month class. You signed up for a 3-month class. And you may be ready to bail at the end of this month, and that would be fine. But the thought is that we would continue on with Sermon on the Mount because there is a lot to explore that obviously we're not going to get to. So if I were to continue teaching this class, not in the summer, but in the fall quarter, how would that go is what we want to know. And if that's a problem for you, and I know some of you may be teaching during that quarter, and that's understandable. What I'm saying is I don't want to force you into that situation when that's not what you signed up for. But I do believe that there's still some value for us to explore, and I believe there is a full quarter's worth of material that Jesus is teaching. So I'm not going to say that you're required to take part 2 of this class. I'm just asking your opinion to see how you think that would go and if that would be something valuable for you. So think about that. You can talk to me privately about that, or if somebody has something they'd like to say about that, feel free to do that. But that's what we're thinking right now. And it's not only because I haven't budgeted my time well. That's part of it. But we are still looking for establishing this new culture of having multiple adult classes, and that has become a little bit of a challenge for us to get all of that up and off the ground. So we're still trying to get that established. So that would be part of that plan as well. So let me know what you have to say about that, and we'll proceed. Right now, that's the thought. All right? Second thing, there may be some of you who would like to share with us on the assignment that I made a few weeks ago about exposing the hypocrisy of Phariseeism today, and I want to provide that opportunity for you to do that in just a moment as we think about that. So if you have that, you want to share that, we want to hear from you about that. You will have that opportunity today and for the next 2 weeks as well as we think about that. We are proceeding through our outline in really record pace here, all right? We've gotten through the Beatitudes, and we've gotten through the 3 metaphors, and now we have come into the actual sermon body where Jesus presents this theme verse of chapter 5, verse 17. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. And now we're in that section where he's talking about how the law is being fulfilled, how the law is coming to wholeness and completeness in our understanding of its nuances beyond just the surface. And so we are diving down beneath the surface, trying to get to the understanding of these principles that Jesus is talking about. And we're talking about righteousness. That's what the Sermon on the Mount is about. It's about righteousness. Let me just say this, that the religious world today has so minimized this concept in this Calvinistic expression of there's really nothing that you can do. God has done everything there is to be done. You just need to accept the gift that God is offering you. That is not the message that Jesus had for his kingdom citizens at all. He was about their behavior. And beyond behavior, what we're discovering is Sermon on the Mount is not about behavior modification. It is about retraining your hearts to be prepared to be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. And so this is not a small thing. This is not righteousness 101. When Jesus is teaching this is high order righteousness. This is for people who are looking forward to entering into this kingdom with a determination to be like Jesus. We're going to get to the last verse of this chapter eventually. But I want you to look at that last verse, because of all of the shocking things Jesus said, maybe this is among the most shocking when he says at the conclusion of these 6 case studies, therefore you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Does that sound shocking to you? Does that sound impossible to you? We're going to talk some more about this in our future classes. This word that is in English, in our English translation, is perfect. I'm going to make a similar point that I was making when we're talking about blessing. It conveys a thought that in our English way of interpreting this, it may just be a moment where we just have to throw our hands up and say, it's impossible. Who can do that? While it's noble to think about being perfect, to be compared to the perfection of our Heavenly Father, I mean, that's just an impossible ask, Jesus. And, there's one thing to say your righteousness has to surpass that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Now we've got to be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. And they would strike them in a similar way, but I'm going to make the point when we get there that perfect maybe is not the best word for us to think about the way that we interpret the word perfect. I want you to think about the word wholeness. We'll get to that word eventually. But Jesus is talking about righteousness. There's work to do. You're not earning your salvation, by the way. But you are conforming into the image of Christ. You're becoming more like Him. And it's not enough to just behave like Him. It's not enough to have the externals all right. The Pharisees were all about that. Get the externals right. Get the behavior spot on. Make sure you look the part. He said, no, we've got to do better than that. The heart has to be transformed. And so as we look at these case studies then, we understand that he's really dealing with the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and how they've mutilated the law. They've gutted the law of its true intention. Being satisfied to not commit murder, but having no problem at all with holding people in contempt or treating people with contempt, I should say. Treating people as if they do not have this inherent quality of God, having this image of God placed upon them. And that needs to be something that is very carefully considered. And so when we get into these case studies, we began last week talking about murder, and then we made this point about how that Jesus said it's not enough to just not murder. We have to get to the point where we remove the murderous rage from our hearts. Not only that, but we have to remove the contempt that we have for other people from our hearts. And then with our mouths, we have to conform into the image of God, because our mouths reveal what's in our heart. We can't even give those lesser insults of "you idiot" to describe somebody. And Jesus describes this in terms of, this is fulfillment of the commandment, do not commit murder. John, I think, got that point very well. What did John say about the one who hates his brother? Do you remember in the epistle? Which chapter was that? I think 1 John 3. 1 John 3, verse 15. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer.
Like Cain and Abel.
Exactly. A lot of the scholars believe that when Jesus talks about this type of anger, that this is actually a hyperlink. Like you push that hyperlink, it takes you back to another reference. That this is a reference to Cain and Abel. That's the type of anger. And so Jesus flips our ethics upside down. He scrambles our whole set of values by saying, if you're guilty of murderous rage, you're going to be standing in the same court as if you committed murder. And if you have this contemptuous insult to say to your brother, you're worthless, you're empty, you're a nothing, you're guilty before the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin. And if you just say to somebody, you fool, you're guilty in God's court. And so the significance of those things gets ramped up. Oh, and we all became very uncomfortable with this last week, didn't we?
All week long.
All week long?
Yeah.
That's what the Sermon on the Mount does to us. That's what it did to them. It made them uncomfortable with status quo. We've got to do better. Our hearts have to be engaged. Our hearts need to be trained. I concluded with a statement last week. I haven't forgotten about the assignment. Those of you who are on the edge of your seat, okay? I wanted to share. Why don't we go there? Why don't we just do that before because I'm getting wound up. You see what's happening here. You see the problem, right? You're seeing. Okay, so let's go to the assignment. Some of you may want to share something about your ideas about following the footsteps of Jesus and dealing with the treachery of the Pharisaic traditions that we deal with in our modern age. Any volunteers today? Steve.
You've heard it said that you can't do two acts of worship at the same time. But I say to you, your entire life is to be worship.
Wow. Yeah. I had a similar one to that. Thinking about how we label what we do in the assembly as worship. You've heard it said that there are 5 acts of worship that must be accomplished. But I say to you, you're a priest. Your life is about worship. And just because it is an activity that is accomplished in our assembly, don't believe that you have completed the so-called 5 acts of worship. I've said it before and I'll say it again. That's a horrible list. It's a man-made list that doesn't begin to describe who we are as priests and how we bring our worship before the altar of God in our good works and in our relationships and in how we treat other people. That's what our worship should involve. I'm on a completely different subject now, and I'm getting, Steve, you stimulate me, brother. You stimulate me.
I mean, that stuff you said about the Hebrews, that class you did before, that's terrific stuff to think about.
Thank you. Yes, it is terrific to think about what the Bible actually says about these topics and putting away the man-made traditions and the man-made laws that have been established for us. And the codification of the New Testament as it has unfolded. We have benefited so much from people who were before us, who have taught us, but not all of the teaching needs to be held on to. Some of it needs to be discarded. Like Jesus was discarding some of the teaching of the Pharisees of his day. Not all of it, but some of it. Anybody else care to share? And you have heard it was said statement with us today. Some of you are waiting for the grand finale of this assignment, right? Okay, that's fine. Uh-oh, Bonnie.
I'm trying to say this very, very carefully. You've heard it said that the church is about the church. And in my younger years, I prized church. I had my children in church. I did everything that I was supposed to do. And neglected the experience of a relationship, which is a whole different level.
Let me see if I'm getting what you're saying. You're saying that
Very carefully, Bruce.
our identity as Christ followers is contained much more than where our church membership lies, and is more than just what surrounds the activities of church membership. It's every day. It's in relationships. Am I getting to the root of what you're saying?
It's in every hour. It's in my hand, in the hand of Jesus.
I would say
Instead
that
of my hand in the hand of my church.
Yeah.
Church is great. Like you said, we're not discarded.
We are
There's
members of a
whole-
community, and that's very important. But
whole
that
other level.
that community is not all encompassing of our expressions of who we are in faith.
Did I manage to offend everybody in here? No.
I think you indicted yourself more than you
And
did.
I'm good with that because when I came on board, that's what it was about. And I wanted to conform, I wanted to be and do and
Yeah.
exemplify a member here.
Yeah.
And what I missed in all of that, and that's on me, is that I needed to be digging deeper into Christ.
We all checked boxes.
We did.
But I don't want to offend anyone else. This is just me. Unless you raise your hand and say me too.
Me too.
We do. Okay.
Me too.
Well, I think Bonnie's onto something. She didn't use the phrase church centricity, where we become so church focused and church centric. And then we start thinking without realizing it, we come to be served as a consumer, and yet we should be coming as a producer when we do come to church. And the notion that once we do produce in the form of stimulating one each other to love and good deeds, taking it to next level, whether it's a relationship with the Lord or relationship with others outside of where we come to consume or maybe produce, that the real production takes place during the rest of the week in our relationships, that we're seeking every opportunity to do good to others. So I think that's kind of what mine was getting close to. Maybe
He
not.
said it so much better. I'll just go
I
with
saw,
that.
I saw Bonnie going like this. I thought, oh no, Ben, you're in trouble.
No, he
I
just,
don't know what it means when
She
she
was-
does that.
yeah, it could go both ways.
She was just saying, this man, he's
Yeah,
got it.
That's exactly what I said.
All right.
That's
Thank
it.
you for those. That's super meaningful, and we need to talk about these things. We need to talk about these things. It's important for us as we conform our hearts to citizens of the kingdom of heaven, to dig deeper, to do better, to get to the heart of the matter. Anybody else care to share it today? I don't blame anybody for passing after those two examples. Those were excellent. Thank you. Thank you for those. All right, so we're here in this discussion of these case studies, in this first triad of murder, adultery, and divorce. And I've made this comment last week, and I didn't really explain it. I just began to explain it. But I believe that all of this triad centers around this concept of the image bearers and how you relate to fellow image bearers of God. It's obvious in the first one that when a person commits murder, he is saying there is no value on this other person, so much so that we'll just erase them from this world. And not only should they be erased, but I am arrogant enough that I will do the erasing. I am in a position where I can evaluate their worth in this world, and in my opinion, their worth is nil. And so they can be erased, and I can do it. Well, just amazing arrogance of somebody placing themselves in that position of an evaluator of the value of another human being. It's just unthinkable. And we understand that when it comes to murder. But when it comes to these other relationships of conflict that we have in this world, to understand that that same concept comes over in how we speak to one another and how we interact with one another, still as image bearers. And even when you say, you idiot, you are placing yourself in that same arrogant place of evaluation, saying, I can evaluate your worth as a human being. Forget you're an image bearer. You are not an image bearer. That is not your identity. Your identity is idiot. The arrogance of that. It needs to be unsettling to us because we've all let ourselves go that far, haven't we? We all have. Jesus indicts all of us. And we consider it a light thing, a small thing to do that. And Jesus' point is, it's not a small thing. Jesus has this habit of going back to the beginning of God's intentions. Creation. He creates human beings. He gives them his image. And there's where he's talking about. In the next one, or the third one rather, he goes back to the beginning when he talks about divorce. Here's God's intention for human beings when they enter into this covenant together. He goes back to the beginning. Jesus makes a habit of going back to God's ideal intention for us and how that should set the stage for these relationships. Image bearers is something that we cannot forget. And so when we get to this second one, how does that fit in this idea of training our hearts? Well, it's obvious that Jesus is dealing with adultery here in a way that is somewhat different than we might think about it. Because Jesus lives in a male-focused culture. And Jesus only addresses the men in this one and in the next one. When it comes to adultery and when it comes to divorce, he's addressing the men. Did you notice that? It's a male-centered culture. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. Again, one of the great 10 commandments. But I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman to lust for her has committed adultery already in his heart. So we see Jesus diving deep. When you read the command, do not commit adultery, it's more than a physical act in which a marriage covenant is broken. It's more than that. Because men, if you look at a woman to lust. Men are visual creatures. Men, when they see the female form and the beauty of that, God created us in such a way to be attracted to that, have that appeal. And the beauty of that relationship, the sexual relationship, is expressed in marriage. God gave that to us. And what a privilege and a beautiful thing that is, that God has presented for us. But it sets up this other abuse of that relationship. So this man is depicted as looking on a woman. And this is not just looking and observing, well, there were beautiful women in this room. That's not what Jesus is condemning here. Looking at a woman to lust. David's on his rooftop looking around, and he sees Bathsheba bathing. There's no sin in David seeing Bathsheba bathing. When it becomes sin is when David spends time. And it becomes, as we might say today, a creepy leering. That's what's happening, isn't it? Men do that, right? It's creepy. Why is it creepy? Because the man is looking at a woman that's not his. And he's having all of these imaginations in his mind of how he can satisfy his own lust and how that he can have his own fantasy about this. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to this very thing. The pornography industry understands men primarily so well that men are prone to leer and be creepy. And why that's creepy and why that is ugly is because he is objectifying an image bearer, right? Isn't that what is happening here? He's saying, forget that she is in the image of God. This is how I can satisfy my lust. And so he arrogantly then places this image of her in his fantasy. And says, now this is mine. And I can use her for my fantasy. And Jesus said, when you do that, you commit adultery in your heart. I didn't touch her, Jesus. You committed adultery in your heart. You see, with Jesus, it's not so much about the sin and its commission of the sin on the hand, whether it's murder or whether it's adultery. He wants to get to the fountainhead of that sin. And the fountainhead is in the heart of this human being. Some people will say, well, boys will be boys. Boys will look. And boys may look. But to become a creepy, leering boy, that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. How are we going to break this cycle, Jesus? Well, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out. Don't you think that's rather extreme, Jesus? And if, and not only tear it out, throw it from you. For it's better that one of the parts of your body perish than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. What's at stake here? What is at stake here, Jesus? Hell? Spiritual death is at stake here? A few years ago, my brother-in-law had an infection that began in the bottom of his foot. And he treated it, and treated it, and treated it. He sought treatment for it for years. It got to the point where it was threatening his life. What do? When your life is threatened, you cut it off. Amputations occur for the salvation of the life. And that's what is at risk here. Your spiritual existence is at risk here. The stakes are high. And you need to be willing to amputate your eye and amputate your hand if it makes you stumble. Jesus is really getting to the shock value of this, right? Did the eye make you stumble? It's not an eye thing, is it? No. Because you still have a left eye. Well, is the left eye incapable of producing lust? No. And the left hand? No. But Jesus is saying we need to take extreme measures, even to the point of amputation, because it is your spiritual life at risk here. James says in James 1 and verse 15, sin occurs when lust is conceived, and then it gives birth to sin. That conception of sin that occurs in the heart is where we must deal with this matter. So finding the root cause of this, if it is your eye, be willing to sacrifice the eye. If it is the hand, be willing to sacrifice the hand. We know that that's not really the root cause. That is somewhere upstream from the root cause. But Jesus' point is very clear. We need to take extreme measures to correct the heart. So again, it's not just the physical act of adultery that God cares about. It is the internal disposition of the heart. Yes, Matt.
When I read that one about cutting it off, we also have to keep in mind they didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have antiseptic techniques, they didn't even have a tourniquet. And so amputation in this time
It'd be
was
very
very
common.
different than what it looks like today.
And it would not only does it look very different, and it would itself be a risk to the life of that person, but it was also a very common thing, especially in times of war, as you might imagine. Yeah, Gensis.
Thinking about it, it's kind of a relief that I don't really need to start mutilating myself. There's an easier answer. Okay.
Yes, I will say that yes, with this caveat.
If you're willing to go that path.
Mutilation of your heart needs to happen,
Yeah.
right? You need to start over in some cases with your heart. Is that easier or harder? I don't know.
You know what? I think it's harder up front, but it's like a learning curve. It's a steeper learning curve, but when you get up there, the other stuff he's talking about, it's easier.
Yeah.
But the hard part is getting up that learning curve.
Yeah. Do you see how Jesus is making the same point here? That the objectification of women is failure to recognize them as image bearers. It has the same root cause as murder. It's the same arrogance that proceeds from the heart. It's the same selfishness. It's the same self-elevation. Jesus is dealing with the same types of character problems that we have. And so an arrogant disregard for the dignity of a fellow image bearer, Jesus says we cannot have that. And the stakes, of course, are huge. And the buzzer just went off, I think.
Steve believes it's over.
All right. There may be things that you would like to say as we conclude class today.
Well, again, just when you say easier, perhaps do you mean simpler? Like,
There you go.
Not-
Simpler.
not easier, but a clear-cut, simpler solution.
I had the thought that when Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, because my burden is easy and my yoke is light." There's something, and the reason I'm attracted to Jesus' teaching is there's something easier about it. Maybe it's simpler. It really does get to the heart of the matter, which is the solution. This other stuff isn't the solution. It's stuff we can do, but it doesn't solve the problem.
So which is easier, following the Pharisees or following Jesus?
Yes.
Be careful. The answer.
There are a couple of different ways of looking at it. I would say following Jesus, because people come to Jesus and he's what? He's completely open arms.
It's more peaceful.
He's welcoming. He's forgiving. He's not there to judge you so much as he is there to forgive you. The Pharisees are very quick to judge. That's their first impulse.
But you don't have to think about that. There's no heart working on following the Pharisees. So it's
Yeah.
easier to just say,
It's easier to
"Oh,
do,
I'll check these things off."
but if you really want to have
It's easier to say I'm not
the yeah, I'm gonna have to think about how to say that.
I didn't hear what
I
you
would
said.
say it's easier to do than it is to become. And all of this is about becoming like Christ and not just a checklist of things to do and not do. And also, I was going to say at the end that last word, that last phrase, perfect, doesn't scare me because I look at it as perfecting. I'm being perfected by Christ as I study his teaching in a way.
We're gonna do some more work on that. I like that.
practices.
All right, thank you.